Fairly uncontroversial for me to argue that various versions of morality that philosophers have espoused throughout history, the criteria for what makes an action good, what makes a person good, can be shown to be unsatisfactory when come under serious scrutiny. And I'm not going to go through all versions of morality and quote them individually and then say God did it. I wish to address something more fundamental. I think most people would agree that regardless of its nature and the way it manifests, morality can still be said to exist in some way, maybe as some kind of irreducible property in the world, maybe a social construction. It doesn't have to be material. And we are justified in imagining such a thing existing in the world as we know it without some divine entity commanding everything. This picture seems compatible with atheism, however, I will show that the idea of morality without God is incoherent. To do this, I must first establish what it means exactly for something to exist. What criteria needs to be in place for something to have the property of existence. But in order for something to exist in any meaningful way, it needs to have an objective metaphysical foundation. And that definition might seem redundant, but there are many things which don't meet this criterion which we still believe to exist. Illusions of pragmatic convention and creations of the mind. And godless morality is such an illusion. In order for something to exist, in order for morality to exist, it must identify real properties in the world about which one can be correct or incorrect. And this requires the existence of objective value in the world. It must be possible for something to be valuable universally, and that value must endure independent of whether anyone believes in it or not. It is incoherent to posit values which are simultaneously subjective and correct. Like the fact that I value something might be true, but that doesn't make the value true. And it doesn't make sense to say that something can be valued objectively without invoking a transcendent evaluator. What else could count as an objective source of values? Not humans, not subjects, who produce diverse, changing and contradictory opinions of what is moral and valuable. Like even the things you would think to be objectively valuable, like life and survival, come under scrutiny when you consider that there are people who argue that survival is a moral vice, that voluntary extinction is ultimately what's good for the world. So in the absence of God, a truly objective evaluator, can anything in the atheist conception of the universe count as a source of objective value in which to ground our moral principles? Many atheists, famously Sam Harris, like to point to the evolutionary origins of our moral behaviour. It's theorised that morality has its origin in certain norms which are socially advantageous, and we're hardwired to be empathetic beings by means of mirror neurons in the brain which predispose us to literally feel other people's pain when we see it. But this doesn't mean that morality is hardwired. It only describes how empathy operates, and there's no reason to suppose that empathetic behaviour equates to moral behaviour. Indeed, many morally questionable acts are often carried out in the name of empathy. I'm sure Hitler had a lot of empathy for the perceived plights of the Aryan race, but who's to say the same neural processes weren't involved in that situation as with me, say, giving change to a beggar? This is not an atheist account of objective value, it simply describes how humans behave, and nowhere in this picture does a prescriptive criterion emerge. Indeed, David Hume made it clear that it is logically impossible to derive a value from a fact. So, if it is illogical to appeal to the descriptive material world in justifying the existence of objective value, and we as atheists cannot appeal to a transcendent evaluator, what option does that leave? Perhaps an atheist could argue that it is unnecessary to ground our moral principles in objective value, but if morality is an object of existence, it does not make sense to base it in non-objective value, on subjective value. If you want to talk about something being morally right or wrong, you're talking about the truth here. Something cannot be subjectively true. Truth does not permit both P and not P, unless you're a grave priest. But there has to be a fact of the matter, or else there is no truth. So where does that leave the moral atheist? One viable alternative seems to be that morality exists as a social construction or a useful fiction. However, it is nonsensical to posit that something is both a social construction and that it exists. When we talk of social constructions, we posit them in contradistinction to things which exist, things which have real, objective, metaphysical foundation. If we were to include social constructions in the category of things which exist, we would make existence so radically relative as to permit anything to exist. Similarly, morality cannot be said to exist as a useful fiction, as some theorists have proposed. If something is fictional, that definitionally entails that it doesn't exist. You could quite reasonably defend the use of that fiction, but that is a separate argument from the one that morality exists. Although, I guess some philosophers would argue that fictitious entities do exist. I met one the other day. He said that Santa Claus exists, and Santa Claus is the focal point of all of our Christmassy thoughts about Santa Claus. And I said, sure. But really, if morality does exist in the same way as fictional entities like Santa Claus, as the focal point of all our lovely morally thoughts, or as a social construction, consider what a superficial kind of existence that is. If we're justified in calling it existence at all, that is, at the very least, our whole concept of existence is seriously devalued if we permit the objects of fiction, the objects of unreality, to exist. At best, you can say that the idea of morality exists, but the idea of morality is ontologically distinct from morality itself. The idea is X, the thing it refers to is Y. So, to sum up, the only meaningful way for morality to exist is if it's based on objective value, and the only way for objective value to be possible is if the source is supernatural. Humans do not possess the capacity for objective value, and material things do not value. Now, I'm not arguing that God exists, or that the existence of morality is incompatible. No, I'm just arguing that the existence of morality is incompatible with atheism. Nor am I saying that values and preferences don't exist, but values and preferences don't give us morality. Morality is something extra that has been introduced into the picture without sufficient epistemic justification. It cannot logically follow from subjective values that there comes a standard by which we should all live our lives, that there comes a morality. And reality is not something one wills into the world. Without God, an objective metaphysical foundation, there can be no absolute right or wrong, just subjective right or wrong. And such a right or wrong, by virtue of being subjective, is no right or wrong at all.